So first of all, welcome everyone to the call. And before we start, just a small introduction. This is our monthly event, which is called Mind Expansion Extended. So it's like a kind of collaborative workshop or experience. The theme of this month is the power of poetic thinking, which is an idea and a suggestion from Susan Moon, which is a lovely member of our team and also a poet. So I think it's really befitting. But Susan, please do introduce yourself briefly and tell us maybe why you chose this topic for this month.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Susan. I am based in the US, currently in New York, but usually based on the West Coast. Poetry and poetic thinking is really kind of a near and dear topic to me. I think there's a quote, something like, people won't remember necessarily what you said, but they'll remember how it made them feel. And I think that holds true for all of our interactions, all of our work. And so today, I wanted to pull in this thread about poetic thinking and how it can help us in our work, how it can help us work together, and how it can help us kind of break free from the boundaries of our thoughts that we kind of accept as status quo thoughts, or just thoughts that we take for granted, how we can kind of relook at those and decalcify some of those dusty thoughts. So today we'll be talking about the power of poetic thinking as really a practice in making unexpected connections and embracing contradiction. And maybe a good starting point is this quote from poet Kay Ryan, who said, "If we are not compelled to submit in some way to a poem, it cannot change us." And I pull this Kay Ryan quote through because I felt that it echoed some of our values that we have here at Sense Worldwide. We have several values. I'm sure if this isn't your first time, perhaps you've heard them referenced on other mind expansion events or otherwise. But some of our values we have, like be human, be creative, collaborate, be hungry. But this one in particular, this quote in particular, I feel like speaks to one of our values, which is around pushing our boundaries, stepping outside our comfort zone and embracing ambiguity. And in that process of leaning into ambiguity, knowing that the team is with you and you can lean into them, trust them. And so whether we are working together or with each other on our Sense Worldwide team, or whether we're collaborating with sensors like you all, something that we always try to do is walk in with an open posture, and in doing so, be able to be challenged and be changed by each other's perspectives. And so kind of going back to that idea of when we walk into a poem, if we are not compelled to submit in some way to it, it cannot change us. So it's this question around how do we always keep an open posture when we're entering into a space, and allow our perspectives, allow our minds to be changed, expanded. So our agenda today, what we're going to talk about, for anyone who's holding their breath, worried that I'm going to ask you to produce a poem and then perform some kind of slam poetry like You Can Exhale. That's not what today is about. Actually, today is really about, we're going to talk about the importance of making associative leaps, and connecting the dots on both an individual and collective level of making those leaps. And then tapping into poetic thinking as a way to unlock individual and group potential. So again, today is really, we are not going to do a few things today. I think poetry kind of gets a bad rap for being exclusive or elitist. But actually, I think of poems really as a space of generosity and broadened understanding than before. So today we won't be writing individual poems. We will be writing some lines, but it'll be a little different than what you might think of for writing a poem. We're not going to be analyzing any abstract or esoteric poems. And we're also not going to impose any right or wrong ways to read or write a poem either. So that is kind of what we have in mind for today. So so I mentioned associative leaps. What are they? So associative leaps, we're really talking about connecting the dots across seemingly unrelated ideas that defy logic. And so logic serves a really important purpose in our lives. Logic helps us to navigate different spaces. Logic helps us to make sound decisions. Logic helps us to advance as groups of people, as communities of humans. Like if we all have some kind of shared logic, it creates this kind of social contract in place. However, gone for too long or gone unchecked, sometimes logic can hold us back, or logic might be just the bare minimum to what we haven't explored yet. There's a lot out there that we haven't explored yet. And so it really requires us to go to kind of defy the gravity of logic and be open to new spaces. And so the one other piece about associative leaps is really about bringing visibility to some of the deeper emotional and psychological nuances and connections that may not be obvious or apparent on the outset. But if we keep an open enough posture and we pay attention to some of the patterns, we're able to start seeing those unseen patterns. And so what leaping allows us to do, it allows us to be startled. It allows us to startle other people too. It's about astonishment. I guess it's I think I'm sure in this room, we have a lot of different lines of work here, a lot of people doing a lot of interesting things. And so I think when I say startle and be startled, it's this idea of when we're committed to our work, if we're not challenged or surprised by the work we're doing, chances are that your audience will also not be surprised or challenged. And so this idea of if you're not surprised, if you yourself aren't surprising yourself, maybe there's some more layers to peel back that you haven't seen yet. So leaping is also about disrupting some of the formulaic patterns, what I was talking about earlier about defying logic. And so how do we fight the gravity of some of the formulas that are in place to find new ways of thinking, new ways of moving through the world that do exist, but just haven't been embraced or appreciated yet. And most importantly, leaping, what it really does is it allows us to restore a sense of play, experimentation, and possibility. There's this great quote from Christopher Salerno. It talks about, I really want to read and write poetry that has the ability to startle by getting beyond the automatism of commercial and habitual unconscious knowledge and language. And so I think it's a really interesting point. I think this quote feels super timely, especially in light of tools like ChatGPT and AI, bringing us to this question of like, how do we make sure that we are pushing the boundaries beyond what we're comfortable knowing, and really leave room for change. And so this is that piece about leaving room for change. I think that's why bringing a poetic mind is really important to our work, regardless of what spaces we span. So let me see, before I play this, before I see if this works on y'all's side, has anyone here not seen Everything Everywhere All at Once? Okay, I see some hands. So for anyone that has not seen this incredible film, highly recommend. But give a little bit of context, and there's no spoiler alert here. It's just like a small piece of the film. But to give a little bit of context, there's this thing that the characters have to do in order to access different realms. They're in a multiverse, and in order to access different parts of the multiverse, there's this thing called verse jumping. And so verse jumping in this film is a form of interdimensional travel. Basically, in order to verse jump, the characters have to perform the most improbable action they can possibly think of in order to access an alternate universe. So they have to perform like really wacky, really strange, like unthinkable acts in order to access different parts. I think this film clip will actually illustrate it better than me explaining. So let me see if and Joya, if you could give me a heads up if you can hear the audio.
Okay, whatever you think about doing, don't do it. Sir?
Paid yourself.
Wait, you don't know where you'll jump. Find your jumping pads.
Okay. So I see, totally wacky. I don't think any of us would have thought to chomp off the top of our chapstick like that. But I show that sequence of events just to illustrate this idea about burst jumping, about making associative leaps. And it's really a question of how might we push our boundaries and make leaps outside of our comfort zone. So I mentioned we weren't going to read any esoteric poems, but we are talking about poetry after all. So I wanted to ask the question, what does verse jumping look like in a poem? So this is the poem that we can all look at. Can I ask anyone who's interested to just read this for the group?
I will.
Thank you, Chris.
This is Chris. Moonshine. The poets are right about the moonlight. I take my spot of sky and deposit it into a savings account. Only after the bank confiscated our house did I understand. Roses don't grow without pricked hands. I didn't have to spend a summer in a freezer packing lunch meat to know the value of sunlight. My mom didn't have to spend a decade wiping down floors to appreciate education. When I give you a bouquet of roses, I give you a bouquet of bloody hands, a handful of dirt and the worms that doted on your roses. When I take my piece of sky out of the bank, it's smaller. The drunks are right about moonshine.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Well read, Chris.
Could I, yes, I am asking the same thing. It's like, do you have a voice acting studio behind the drum set and everything back there?
No, I do not have a voice acting studio. I've never done voiceover. I read poetry, wrote poetry, so got up on stage and read. But anyway.
Wonderful. Snaps for Chris. If I may ask everyone to, I know it's a different experience reading poetry versus hearing poetry. And if anyone wants to take a second and let it sink in, read it one more time. And I'd love to hear any of your one-word reactions of how it made you, what it made you think of, how it made you feel. And you can feel free to drop that in the chat. Awesome, everyone. As people are continuing to trickle in with some thoughts, I'll just read some of the ones. Yeah, some people talking about how it comes full circle, how there's kind of a feeling of stretch in reading this poem. And Josh speaking to some of the in and out nature of moonshine to roses to labor to roses to moonshine. Chris, your point about the leaps happening, like we're talking about roses and all of a sudden we're also thinking about where we have this visual of bloody hands. And yeah, these creative leaps kind of taking us for a ride and stretching us in the process. So this poem is titled Moonshine, and it's by Jose Olivares. And it's an interesting poem because there's a dime a dozen of poems, poets writing moon poems, poems about the moon. And usually those poems, there's a lot of moon poems that are waxing poetic over the moon. But I think we could probably all agree that this is not just another moon poem. There's a lot of verse jumping going on, from the moon to poets to labor to hardship to experiences growing up, to memories of mother. And I attempted to just start mapping out some of the leaps, just out of curiosity of like, what are all the different multiverses we're traveling through just in this one short poem. And so we are going through all these different parallel universes, and the poem, I feel that the poem is really made by, we're talking about the moon, but the poem is really made by the lunch meat, the worms, the dirt, and the drunks. It brings some level of character to the poem that was unexpected, that we wouldn't have thought of immediately. And the piece about the roses is so interesting because you can't really, I think the thing that Jose Olivares does really well is this idea of like with roses, there's like endless adoration adoration and praise we could sing about roses, but you can't really talk about roses without talking about the thorns. And so the poet really brings this poem to life through their own associative leaps. And in doing so, they break patterns with some of the typical associations we might have when we think of the moon, when we think of moonlight. It's really a genius jump thinking of like, okay, here's the moon. And then we're talking about moonshine. We're with the moon, we're thinking about poets. We're also thinking about drunks with the moonshine. And so these are all just examples of what it looks like to break the pattern of our thinking, and invite new influences into our work. And so something I want to ask us all to do as a quick warm up is it's a practice of us making some individual leaps. And what I'd like to do is I'm thinking of, just like in this poem, if I asked you all to think of what are some things that bubble up in your mind when you really like sit and meditate on the moon. In this room of 6 of us, I think, we would come up with very different answers. For example, also, if I were to say car, like for us to think of all the different associations that come to mind when you think of a car. For me, it might bring up the visual of like someone's bumper sticker on the back of the car when I was on my morning commute this morning, or it might remind someone else of failing their driving test. But all of these are all interesting points of convergence around that image. And so what I'm going to ask is for each of us to I'll give us 5 minutes, and I want us to come up with 5 associations. You can write them. Like on just separately. You don't have to add them in the chat. Later, I will ask you to share a favorite. But if you could think of any associations that come to mind when you bring to mind an onion. So I will give us 5 minutes to do that.
Susan, are we doing 5 associations with onions, or is that the starting point and we're leaping out from there? Or is there no right answer to this?
It's honestly what bubbles up in your mind. If you start with the onion and it leads you down like 5 things around an onion, or if the things that you think of lead you down other paths, that's okay too.
Cool, thanks.
And meanwhile, Susan, maybe you can have a look at the chat. There are couple of questions, so at any time during your explanation we can cover that.
Yes, I will.
Susan, is it okay if we share it in the chat as well, or do you prefer for us just to keep it to ourselves?
In the chat is great too. Either way, I'll ask people to share on the other side of our writing time. Wonderful. I think we're starting to wind down, so feel free to continue writing. But as we come up for breath, if anyone wants to share any out of all of the associations you wrote, what is the most vivid memory, or the one that you feel is most vivid in your mind? If you could just share one, and feel free to unmute yourself and share with the group.
Susan, was that the most vivid point that stands out to us from our list?
Yes, from your own list.
For mine, it's past holidays. I used to go to France every year as a kid, and my dad would always make French onion soup. I just remember the hours that he would spend caramelizing them in the kitchen, and then sort of having it with a nice baguette, bit of French cheese on top. Delicious.
Oh my gosh! If anyone hasn't eaten lunch yet, we're all drooling right now. Thank you, Freddie, for sharing.
Freddie, we're living in parallel universes. I went down that burst as well.
Mine is less nostalgic than Freddie's, but every week I have like some produce sent over from cooperative farmers. And today, and this is why today is one of my association, I opened the box and were this like the gigantic red onions, straight from the field. So it was really nice to see the word that you pick up today, because he immediately created this association in my mind of like opening up the box and say, oh wow, onions, and thinking how I'm gonna use them. So it was very like aligned with what's happening in my life.
I can't wait to hear what you make from your co-op.
Maybe I should ask Freddie for a recipe.
For the recipe,
Freddie,
yeah.
Send it over.
I may ask for maybe one more person to share. Maybe someone we haven't heard from yet.
Hi there. It's Alistair here.
Hey,
I
Alistair.
was really, hey, how you doing?
Good.
I was kind of laughing in the chat because I saw Shrek come up several times, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. Onions have layers. If you've seen it, you know exactly what it means, and it kind of has that versatility of an onion, and it's now everyone's talked about it, how a caramelized onion, chopping an onion raw, they're so versatile, but they're earthy, and it kind of gave me that feeling like of groundedness, connection, rooted, those kind of words.
Beautiful, Alistair. Thank you so much for sharing. So we have a wealth of onion associations right now. This is not all of them at all. This is just a few. If anyone wants to continue adding theirs below, please do. But between really cozy holiday memories of perfect cheese encrusted French onion soup and making a run for grabbing onions from the market, or more conceptual, abstract, like peeling layers back, like how we all have layers. Like I think it's safe to say that placing some of our individual leaps and associations side by side, it's apparent how one idea or concept or thing can occupy vastly different places and continents in our minds, depending on so many different factors, and across all of our lived experiences, whether it's about your cultural background, where you live, your taste buds, whatnot. And so appreciate you all sharing some of your associations here, and definitely going to add some of these awesome new associations coming into the chat right now. And before we move on to a collective leap exercise, I do want to, let's see, Chris asked a really fantastic question in the chat, and just to voice it over, because it's up above. Chris was saying, I know leaps can be done without metaphors, but what do folks see as differences between metaphors and leaps? So what is the difference between metaphors and leaps? How might one make leaps without metaphors, in poems at least? Second thought, what's the difference, if any, between the poet's leaps and the reader's leaps? So maybe I'll start at the end there. I think actually this onion exercise is a nice, maybe like an example of a response to that question. Is a poet's leaps, like if Chris, you were to write a poem about onions versus if Freddie were to read your same poem about onions, even though you're sharing your personal leaps and associations, Freddie would probably read his own associations and leaps into it. And so I think that being one of the most awesome things about poetry is there's kind of that room and generosity in the poem where we can all reside in the poem with space to bring our different associations into it, and it changes how we read it. But really, as whoever is the poet writing it kind of has that creative license to direct the conversation, and we're lucky as readers to be brought on that journey and also read our own journey into it, I think. But to the other question of the difference between leaps and metaphors, and I'm curious to hear what other people have to say about this too, but I think of leaps as kind of like the broader practice and the broader idea, metaphors being like one kind of mechanism or one mode to access that. I think also, like, how do we make leaps without metaphors? Because metaphors will kind of draw comparison from one thing to another, and we can have surprises in those connections we draw. I think another way that in poetry those leaps are made are when there's a turn in there's a it's called a volta, the moment in the poem where something turns or something shifts. And those moments, it can be you like, I'm trying to think of the exact line. Let me find the poem so that I don't butcher it. But there is a poem by Rilke, and he's written this poem about the torso of Apollo, the sculpture, and it starts off saying, "We cannot know his legendary head with eyes like ripening fruit, and yet his torso is still suffused with brilliance from inside, like a lamp in which his glaze, now turned to low, gleams in all its power. Otherwise, the curved breast could not dazzle you so, nor could a smile through the placid hips and thighs to that dark center where procreation flared. Otherwise, this stone would seem defaced beneath the translucent cascade of the shoulders and would not glisten like a wild beast's fur, would not from all the borders of itself burst like a star, for here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life." So obviously, oh, thank you, Joya. This is an interesting poem. I think that I read through it, but really the main leap here that I think is surprising for everyone comes at the end, where Rilke is describing Apollo, the figure of Apollo, using pretty lush language, and making observations about the sculpture. And then at the very end, he says, "For here there is no place that does not see you. You must change your life." And that's more of it's like a surprise, like the camera angle has suddenly shifted to a different perspective, one that you weren't expecting, because we were kind of doing a 360, that we were kind of going around different angles of the sculpture, and then all of a sudden this idea of you must change your life, and it settles as kind of a not a gut punch, but you're surprised by the time you reach the end of the poem. And so I think in addition to when we're making leaps, in addition to some of the more like comparative metaphors, we also have the power to like redirect the conversation in a direction that wasn't obvious, and we can do that with like specific forms of rhetoric. And so any thoughts on anyone want to chime in with thoughts about thoughts about leaps or the differences between metaphor or leaps, or any reflection so far on the conversation we're having?
For me, what really worked was your explanation of the fact that metaphors are like comparisons, and sometimes they help us understand things by comparing them to other things we might have more experience of, whereas leaps are more like free association, so they might make sense for us. And of course, in reading a poem, we might overlap to the original poet significance, our own. So there's more like room to improvise in attributing a meaning, whereas metaphors sometimes really want us to see the link and make it very visible.
Yeah, I love that, Joya. Yeah, with metaphors, it's like whoever's the author of the metaphor kind of has the control. I think, Joya, you brought up a really nice point about with leaps, there's kind of an improvisational aspect to it. And I think with leaps, we can make leaps inside our own head, but it's also about the leaps we make in relationship with each other, of when we're collaborating or when we're thinking about something together. How can we make those leaps, see those leaps together, make those leaps together? Yeah. Sue, I think I saw your hand up a second ago. I'm not sure if you still.
It was up, but I'm going to hold my question because we just have 15 minutes and I'm kind of super curious, so it's okay. I can send an email or circle back after.
We'll circle back after. So hold that in mind. So the thing I'd love for us, and we were just talking about individual leaps versus collective leaps. And so if I may ask anyone, I want to ask for a theme. Any theme. It could be a place, it could be a smell, it could be anything. Just drop one word in the chat, and we'll go from there. And I will choose between the first. Okay, awesome. So Josh has thrown down the gauntlet. We have jigsaw as our theme here. And so we'll go with Josh's word. And what I'd love for us to do is whether people feel comfortable jumping into the Miro board, or if you want to just talk out loud and I can capture your notes in the Miro board. Our starting point is the word jigsaw, and I'd love to hear your top of mind associations to fill these initial first boxes of when us as a team here's jigsaw, what are we thinking about? And as people see some of the initial first round of associations come up, I invite you to fill out the next round of associated, the 1, 2, 3 circles out, the third tier out of what the second tier of associations make you think of, if that makes sense. So for example, jigsaw to horror movies. What do horror movies make us think of? And as people are filling out their last associations, if you could pick your weirdest, like whatever you think is kind of a strange association that you wrote, and share a little bit of context for it. I'll ask anyone who feels comfortable sharing to do so now.
I can go if you like. I put down clock as one of mine because my another story about my dad, I guess, weirdly, he went through a weird phase of being really into puzzles and then made a clock that he called the timepiece because it was a puzzle piece. It's just a big red puzzle piece that has a clock on it on my wall.
Thank you, Freddie. Chris, did you have any associations or leaps that you wanted to share?
I had vibrations for the carpentry tool version, any electric tool, and you've got this first time using a jigsaw or chainsaw or something that's vibrating. It's those vibrations are kind of scary because is it going to be out of control? And then later on, maybe it's cool, and then your hand starts to hurt. I was thinking about that stuff, and then thinking about my dad, who taught me to use most of those tools.
Wow. Dads are really forefront on the mind today, I think. One of the resonances across all of us. I'll ask one more person to share.
I put Knowledge Factory next to university. It kind of actually, I almost wanted to put Jigsaw again because I just thought of all of these people in a building, all these different units of knowledge, everyone's working together, and it's a jigsaw. I don't know how it all works together, how we all think, and it's a puzzle.
So interesting. Thank you, Alistair. So we have a really robust collective leap map around the word jigsaw. I want to introduce an exercise or a collaborative practice that is called the exquisite corpse. It was practiced by the Surrealists, and the definition of an exquisite corpse is any piece of art that's collaboratively created by a group of people in which each of the individuals contributes a portion towards a single work without seeing any other part of the work of what other people are contributing, and they conjure lines from the unconscious. This drawing on the side is an exquisite corpse. The title is Nude, and it's a collaboration with the artist Miro and Man Ray, Max Morisset, and some other artists. But that's kind of the visual form of an exquisite corpse. What I'm going to ask us to do is create a written version of an exquisite corpse based on and you can pull from any part of our conversation so far, whether you're thinking about the onion imagination that we ran through, or the jigsaw imagination. The idea is that we're basically taking our different ideas, putting them side by side, and making creative leaps across them. So if you are already in the board, I saw some people hopped in earlier. If everyone wants to hop back in, I have some space on the next slide above and below the slide. If everyone wants to claim one of those blocks, and then once you're done, you can just drag your drag your line to the slide, and we'll just do it by order. Whoever's done first, drag your line, and we'll just go by order of how they show up. And you can contribute a phrase, a line, and this is really a kind of an open prompt. So I will keep this on the screen, our jigsaw and onion mind map, just for visual reference if people want to look at that. So yes, I'll give us 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll have 5 minutes at the end for some for celebrating our exquisite corpse and any questions that people have. I think some people are done, so I might just drag some of the lines as I see them. So feel free to drag your lines once you're done as well. Okay. I think we are winding down our exquisite corpse here. Let's see. It looks like I see some periods at the end of this line. So I will drag, oops. Okay. If people want to drag their last lines through, Joya, would you like to read this from top to bottom for us? I think you're on mute, actually.
I'm just waiting to see if everybody had the chance to write something down. There's a line that needs. I think Ife, if you can just drag your line down, because if you're on it, I don't think I can also move it. Yeah. Okay. Wherever you want to position it, it's fine.
Okay, let's go with that here.
Shall I? Are we all there?
Yes.
Okay. So Sensors, exquisite corpse. Cheese-covered baguette dipped into sweet French onion soup. I guess I know what this one is. If this were the moon, I'd have a black eye. Teenage girls cowering on the couch, peeking from behind impenetrable pillows, the thrill of danger and the safety of the home. If we must puzzle it all together, let us run like zombies into the night, leaping forward, bursting backward, shifting into spaces, the freedom and joy of breaking things, patterns, assumptions, linearity, the paths we always walk, to find a place where they could express themselves freely and in complete harmony. Today, I found our new home.
Thank you, Joya. So this is our exquisite corpse. Sometimes it works well, sometimes it's strange, but usually we find some kind of zeitgeist across the body of the work. I think our questions and our prompts and thoughts give birth to something shared, sometimes cohesive, sometimes less cohesive, but most of all kind of fun and exploratory, because we're starting with sweet French onion soup. We're talking about zombies, then black eyes, and we're landing at this place at the end of finding our new home. So congratulations on your first exquisite corpse if you haven't done one before. And to bring it home before we wind down, I just want to leave you all with just some takeaways of what poetic thinking and what associative beliefs help us to do in our work. It's really about helping us to embrace the weird contradictions. It's also a pattern. It's also a practice of pattern matching and burst jumping to access new dimensions. And the last bit is about really leaning into ambiguity, thinking of leap jumping as how can we bring that into our relationships, not just in our individual leap jumping minds, but this practice of not holding on to control, but ceding control, also accepting the offers that other people bring into the space, and all together collectively being able to trust those leaps as we go through the process. So that is our thoughts on burst jumping and poetic leaps. Any questions? I know we're at time, so feel free to drop off, but we'll stick around for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat more. Yes, Sue, we're coming back.
I've come up with a whole new question now, and I'm trying not to like jump every time I hear Susan. It's so hard. Susan being repeated, but it's not me. I'm just curious, Susan, could you tell us a story, if you have one, of how these poetic thinking techniques and opportunities have been incorporated into teams or, organizations or gatherings?
Yeah, let me think about that. Teams or organizations or gatherings. I think some of the exercises that we did, of course, we're not sitting in the room ruminating on an onion, but something that I do think of is how kind of the purpose of those warm-up exercises is to create some level of group mind. And so kind of being able to get out of our heads, get out of judgment space and move into generative exploratory space. And so the way that in team settings, the way, like, different modes or different ways that I've experienced and led different that exercise of collectively making leaps. Like, sometimes it's honestly like more physical of asking everyone to get up and just like moving in the room in a different way, or like interacting with each other in a different way, just to get the blood flowing. I think other ways we do that is kind of, I think a lot, like, actually, I would invite any of our team on the call, as you think about how we kind of try and keep, on all the work that we do, we try and keep more of an open exploration, and as we explore kind of the fuzzy front end of innovation before we kind of converge to any defining nuggets. We try and keep our postures and keep our questions as open as not closing any doors when we create those questions. And so really being open to the different kinds of associations that might come up. Does anyone on Sense Worldwide team have any thoughts on to build, or any other ways that you see?
It made me think of the double diamond process in UX design, where you are, you have a problem, you're exploring the problem, and you want to be very, very open, or you're going to miss something great, like the story of Swiffer, which is a great story how that came about. And also, after you've defined the problem and then you're in the ideation solution, you want to come up with the dumbest things you can, the stupidest things you can. You really want to make those leaps. So in problem solving in the software design, at least where I worked, world, you absolutely wanted to do a lot of leaping and associative type stuff, and the openness.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks so much for chiming in. We are also followers and practitioners of the double diamond, so love that perspective.
I've used 6-word poems in my attempts to become more focused with marketing messages and to try and be a little bit more abstract. I'm very results orientated and data orientated, so in order to try and free myself a little bit more, so I think they were done by Hemingway first. So his famous one was for sale, baby shoes never used. So trying to take a concept and either try and get someone to think, like tell a very short story that goes wider and deeper and creates a backstory that you're intrigued by. So the marketing part, like what can you tell someone that makes them lean in and go, oh, I want to know more about that story you've told me, or trying to simplify something. So I wrote one that was outsider sees woods in the trees, or sees trees in the woods, depending which way you want to do it. So about trying to say, like, particularly for us at Sense Worldwide, we are believers in cognitive diversity and the idea that someone who's outside your sphere of influence, not your traditional sphere of influence, might have a perspective that's valuable to you. So that idea that someone who's completely new to the area might see trees in the woods, whereas all you see is that impenetrable forest. So yeah, I find poetry can be helpful for just trying to free your mind a bit.
Beautiful. I love the 6-word poem idea. I'm going to use that for my titles moving forward too. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining for being down to take some leaps with us today. And I know we're going to be sharing this as the recording. Also, we'll find some place to post our exquisite corpse so that we can all celebrate it in all its glory. But wishing you all a fantastic day, and thank you again so much for being with us.